Why does Donald Trump continue to insist on politicizing a storm? The only person making an accusation that people are not getting what they've asked for is Trump. The only person who is politicizing this is Donald Trump. He's the one guy doing it. The Doge of it all was essentially all the things that the federal government is spending money on for the most part is waste and fraud. But clearly, there are some things where spending money saves lives. And it may not save lives in the moment that you spend it, but at some point, somebody's life, somebody's child could have been saved.
Everyone is too hurt to be thinking about this, and all my condolences goes out to all the families because there's way too many babies that were affected by the Texas flood. But we have to call a spade and really point out this is on Donald Trump's hands. This is all Donald Trump's fault. Had NOAA had the actual funding that they needed, none of this would have went down. People would have been able to be warned, be able to get away and evacuate when they need to. For an example, I'm from New Orleans. When Katrina happened, we knew Katrina was coming. Even when Katrina was so bad, we still knew Katrina was coming and had enough time to evacuate and not be there. These people had no time to evacuate. Families changed forever. Beautiful children of this nation, that's our children. Our children were harmed by this. Our families were harmed by this.
All right, guys, so we got to talk about the tragic story out of Texas that I'm pretty sure most of you guys have heard about, involving the deadly flash floods that struck Texas Hill Country over the July 4th weekend, affecting central Texas, especially Kerr County along the Guadalupe River near Kerrville and Hunt. There was torrential rainfall up to 15 inches in a day, with some areas hitting 6.5 inches in just 3 hours, triggering a dramatic surge in rivers. Now, a flash flood warning was issued early July 4th, but water levels rose 26 to 35 feet in under an hour, which honestly, again, is just insane, right? And it's going to overwhelm places and, infrastructure. Like, for example, there's focus on Camp Mystic, which is an all-girls Christian camp that suffered tragically due to the fact that at least 27 campers and counselors have been killed. The death toll thus far has climbed past 100, with 28 children among the deceased. Many people still missing. And there now is a full-blown effort with the federal government and state government of Texas to find people who are missing and to try to start moving past this disaster and recovering. Now, the unfortunate reality is that when you have these type of natural disasters, people are naturally going to start pointing the fingers and playing the blame game, trying to find somebody who is at fault for what happened. When the reality is that in a lot of these situations, when you talk about the sheer devastation, sometimes, when you have places like, for example, in Central Texas, the terrain there was just terrain that is just very prone to more flooding. And when you get a weather event that happens like this, that essentially kind of came out of nowhere, and you start getting this flooding very fast, sometimes you just are going to get this type of damage, and it's really nobody's fault except the fact that it happened, right? And that's just kind of how weather and nature and the terrain works. Obviously, people want to be more prepared for it, and you hope and pray that people don't lose their lives and that things like this don't happen, but they do happen. And there's not always somebody that you can point the finger to and say, well, it's their fault. However, the left and the liberal media, they are hell-bent on trying to blame not only Trump. We know they're trying to blame Trump, but they're also trying to blame the people there themselves, right? Because the community is a conservative community, and they're also white, right? So you have people basically saying, well, this happened because of their race and because of Trump and because of who they vote for.
To be the one who points it out, but it seems like it needs to get pointed out. So are we not paying attention to majority of the videos that's being shared about this flood and the certain that's on the videos? Hopefully this is opening up some eyes and showing people that he watches. I don't matter who's watching. They're watching. They see you as a person and what you're teaching your kids and how your children treat others and how you treat others. And maybe y'all weren't the best of, helping thy neighbor unless they were still or the same as you. Because I find it ironic that it was the deep southern of Texas that it happened to. We knew back in the days where they used to do everything deep down in the southern.
And what a horror story in Texas. The flash floods in Texas, the Guadalupe River. 51 missing, 51 dead, more missing. Children at a camp. And when the president guts all of the early warning systems and the weathering forecast abilities of the government, these are the results that we're going to start to see on a daily basis, because he's put this country in so much danger by his horrible, horrible decisions and this ridiculously immoral bill that he just signed into law. As Republicans cheered, people will die as a result, and they've started already. Shame on him. Shame on every GOP sycophant who's listening and following the disastrous decisions of this mentally incapacitated POTUS.
Yeah, so it seems like even though Rosie O'Donnell has moved overseas, she still has President Trump living in her head rent-free, right? She can't seem to escape her Trump derangement no matter how far away she gets from the United States of America. But with that being said, it's not just the Looney Tunes who are playing the blame game here. As you guys saw, you have some people who are basically claiming that this happened because they are white Trump supporters and that this is karma for their political beliefs, right? That's essentially what it sounds like. And then you have the media, okay? They are trying to play the blame game by saying that, well, this is a result of climate change, right? Climate change and President Trump and his administration, his policies are what led to people not being prepared or a lack of awareness that this storm was coming. And because of all the cuts to the government, the National Weather Service, they were not prepared. Federal resources were not prepared. All this is happening as a result of Trump, right? That's what they're trying to do. Take a look.
Big breaking news right now. Former head of the NOAA, Richard Spinrad, has come out publicly and stated that he's convinced that the Trump and Musk Doge staff cuts to FEMA are directly tied to the catastrophic events from the Texas flood. Spinrad says that after a forecast is issued, there's usually a warning coordination meteorologist who makes sure to coordinate with people on the ground to ensure that they're safe. But that was one of the positions that was vacant thanks to Musk and Trump.
I am convinced that the staff cuts that we saw were a contributing factor to the inability of the emergency managers to respond. The staffing was just fine, and the White House has concurred with this to get the forecast out, to get the watches and warnings issued. But when you send a message, there's no guarantee it's being received, so someone needs to follow up, and that's the warning coordination meteorologist, a position that was vacant.
Maria, we're also learning that there were significant staffing shortfalls at the National Weather Service's offices in the region.
George, as of right now, the local county officials really didn't want to address that just yet.
Okay. He wants you to know that there were shortages at the National Weather Service. What is the relevant question? Were there shortages in the office that was responsible for this region? Did anybody involved at that office say, the problem was we were understaffed, we needed more bodies? To the contrary, they had extra staff on board in that office going into this event. They understood that they were in a very precarious situation. They brought on more than double the normal expected staff that night. And not one of them is saying that this was the result of Doge cuts. I missed that in George's toss to his reporter on the scene. Great job. Great job informing your ABC News audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point, right? The point is not to inform them. The point is actually to misinform them, right? Because, again, the narrative that somehow, some way, this is Trump's fault, that the Doge cuts, that cutting federal spending is so bad, is so terrible, it's going to lead to these disasters. They got to push that, right? And they got to push that at all costs, even if the facts don't actually line up with that. Because, again, what they're trying to say is that, well, the Doge cuts to the National Weather Service are the reason why this happened, when there's zero facts, there's zero evidence to back that up. In fact, as Megyn Kelly rightfully points out, correctly points out, there are facts and evidence to the contrary, which is that it's actually overstaffed. It was overstaffed at the time, which, again, goes completely against this narrative that somehow, some way, cuts are the reason why people weren't informed or that people weren't aware of this storm. When, again, this was basically like a flash storm. Like, it happened really fast.
And I want to remind everyone, this is an area of our country, in Hill Country up to Texas, that is known as Flash Flood Alley. They also, going into this, had severe to exceptional drought. Now, obviously, we've had a ton of water, so that's going to play a part in the flood watch that is still up until 7 p.m. It includes the same areas that were hit, but also San Antonio and Austin. Overall, this is for 2 to 4 inches. Locally, up to 10 inches, guys. So this is a big deal the next 24 to 36 hours.
A very big deal. And Ginger, how did this even happen? So much rain falling in such a short time.
Right. Well, part of the problem is what we call an MCV, mesoscale convective vortex. It's a really slow-moving system, and it's stuck. There's not a lot of steering winds to get it out of there. And then there are 3 sources of moisture from the Pacific, from the Gulf, and actually from remnants of Barry. That was a storm that hit Mexico more than a week ago. So put all that together, it's like having a kiddie pool and turning 3 faucets on all at once.
And Matt Gutman, in his report, he was telling us there are questions on the ground right now about these warnings and when they went out. What do we know?
Yeah, we know from the AP, they said the National Weather Service offices there were more than staffed. They were staffed extra, actually, which is normal. The National Weather Service confirming to us that that's called surge staffing ahead of a big event like this. The warnings went out, starting with the flood watch at 1:18 p.m. the day before. So that's the day before into the evening of. The WPC puts out this saying 3-inch per hour rainfall rates. They're saying this is going to be bad. Again, 6 p.m. the night before. By midnight, that heavy rain begins. And then at 1:14 a.m., the first flash flood warning goes out. That's the type that goes out on the NOAA weather radio. That's the type that would fly onto your phone. And it had a considerable tag, meaning this is bigger than your run-of-the-mill flood warning. Then the river starts rising, and by 3:35 a.m., that wording is upped. It says, move to higher ground now, act quickly to protect your life. I have to say, just a button here, that having a NOAA weather radio would be very important for everybody, because I think a lot of people are scared, thinking, what's going to happen if I go out camping? Giving yourself just a couple extra minutes. Nothing was perfect here, but guys, there's certainly something that can help, and having that available to you is big.
Yeah. So again, as I said at the beginning of this video, sometimes when it comes to these natural disasters, they happen so fast and they happen in areas that are so vulnerable to flooding, to, the terrain being altered, to, disasters happening, that there's really not that much that can be done, even in a situation like we saw where the National Weather Service was fully staffed. There were warnings about this, at least it seems like a day before this happened. It wasn't a full 24 hours, but it was about 12 hours before the rain really started coming down. And when the rain started coming down, it was coming down so hard that there was only a couple hours for people to really do anything, right? And it is extremely unfortunate. But again, that doesn't stop the mainstream liberal media from running with the narrative that they really want to push so bad, which is that cuts are terrible and that cuts lead to these type of disasters and that this stuff is completely and totally preventable if you just give the government enough money, right? If you just tax people enough, yeah, you can totally prevent all of this stuff. It will never happen, which seems to be the narrative that Abby Phillip wanted to push on CNN. However, she got shut down by Republicans and Democrats on her panel when she tried to go full propaganda mode against President Trump. Take a look.
Yeah, but at the federal level, you have the Trump administration saying for most of the time that they've been in power that they want to eliminate FEMA as an agency. President Trump has said it. Ted Cruz, the senator, has said it. Let's just play some of what Trump has said over the last few months.
I think we're going to recommend that FEMA go away. FEMA has been a very big disappointment. They cost a tremendous amount of money. It's very bureaucratic, and it's very slow.
We want to wean off of FEMA, and we want to bring it down to the state level. A little bit like education, we're moving it back to the states so the governors can handle it. That's why they're governors now. If they can't handle it, they shouldn't be governor. But the FEMA thing has not been a very successful experiment. Very, very expensive, and it doesn't get the job done.
Are you still planning to phase out FEMA?
Well, FEMA is something we can talk about later, but right now they're busy working, so we'll leave it at that.
Isn't this just more proof that FEMA is needed? They are working, as he just said.
First off, I don't think I can't start talking about this without talking about how much we're praying for the 10 or 12 families who are still waiting on news of their child in Central Texas. Those of us who've been camp parents know that you have a lot of trepidation when you hand your kid over to strangers, and camp's a wonderful experience for kids, but every parent's been scared when they did it. FEMA comes in after a disaster. FEMA comes in and aids the state and local officials after a disaster has happened. It's not about disaster preparedness. And disasters in this country are handled by the states and handled by the localities. FEMA mainly serves as a funding source and a lot of red tape between the taxpayers and those localities. It's a fair question to say whether we need to get rid of FEMA or not, because the states could make better use of the money that FEMA is currently soaking up in Washington.
There is a disaster preparedness role to FEMA. And I mean, you're right that they are there in the moments after something happens, but one of the jobs of federal agencies is, as a force multiplier, they also are able to see more than what local officials are able to see and help coordinate.
Talk to state emergency management officials. They'll tell you that FEMA's usually in the way. That everybody who's worked in the hurricane belt knows that. The expertise is at the state level for this. No one's saying the federal government shouldn't help in disasters. No one's saying they shouldn't be of assistance. The question is whether that money's best used with the bureaucracy in Washington or in a state and local area.
I think there's been questions about the National Weather Service. I think, FEMA did get impacted by Doge, but FEMA also has $646 million that is now going to be cut. The thing about this is a tragedy. And if anyone could have done anything different, they would have. But also, it's not just a federal question. It sounded like people locally did not want to spend the money. And I think that there is this stigma about using government money for anything with conservatives, that we should just have a more honest conversation. And if an elected official could go back and say, you know what, I can make the convincing argument to a taxpayer about why we need to spend this. This is good use of government funding, and it's not just wasteful spending or fraud and abuse. But
the Doge of it all was essentially all the things that the federal government is spending money on for the most part is waste and fraud. But clearly, there are some things where spending money saves lives. And it may not save lives in the moment that you spend it, but at some point, somebody's life, somebody's child could have been saved.
Well, I think something that gets lost in this is the Doge cuts have actually not taken effect. They don't take effect until October 1st. And if you talk to the National Weather Service, they say we had 5 staffers instead of the normal 2 that were on hand. We were giving alerts on Thursday warning about this. You talked to the union head of the National Weather Service staffers and said, yeah, we did every single thing we could possibly do. And you're right, it did go back to the localities, but that's where the money goes, and it's up to a local municipality or town to say, hey, yeah, we can afford this or we can't afford this. They put in for a federal grant, they didn't get it. And I mean, it's a terrible situation, but I do think the National Weather Service followed through on everything that they were supposed to do based off of all the current reporting.
Yeah, and that's right. I think on Thursday night, they did send out the notices on it, but what happened on the ground, that's something different. But you're right about that, about the notices going out on Thursday on that. Look, I sit on appropriations, and one of the committees I sit on is Homeland Security, which has FEMA, so I've been dealing with FEMA. President Trump is right about one thing, and that is there is a bureaucracy to FEMA. There is a bureaucracy. So I'm one of those. My philosophy is, do we need to streamline? Do we need to reform FEMA? Absolutely. But there are certain times in our country where there's a situation that the federal government has to come in and coordinate, and FEMA can do that only if they get reformed, only if they get streamlined, because it has become bureaucratic. I can tell you that because I sit on that committee, and there's been times where we were trying to get some things and it was just bouncing from one place to the other place. So streamline it, reforming it, I agree with President Trump and with you also, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think most people who are on the receiving end of disaster relief can tell you it's nothing but bureaucracy sometimes. But the question is, should the agency exist?
Yes.
I think that's the question that the Trump administration, the Trump administration has put that on the table.
Well, the
so that's why
exist.
we are
it doesn't have
having
to
a
exist in the
conversation.
shell that is the current agency. There will be a federal role for disaster, but sometimes agencies are so rotten you have to start over.
All right, up next for
Yeah, so let's not politicize natural disasters, Abby Phillip, which is what she basically claimed when Biden was in office and natural disasters happened. Now all of a sudden she wants to politicize a natural disaster now that Trump is in office, right? She wants to ask questions, right? Just asking questions about whether or not Doge and cutting government spending had anything to do with this disaster. The obvious answer to that question is no, right? It didn't have anything to do with it. But again, that doesn't stop them from wanting to have these conversations about, well, Trump says he wants to cut FEMA, right? See, stuff like this happening, you need FEMA. Well, the argument against FEMA is that states can do it better, right? States can do it more efficiently. The argument is not that we don't need disaster relief. Nobody's arguing with that. I think everybody agrees that we definitely should have disaster relief. It's just about how it's done, right? Is it more efficient to allow states? In my opinion, I think that ideally you would have a system where regions, would handle disaster relief. They would pool their own funds together and they would handle it, and they would have the government, the federal government, as an emergency, just in case they can't handle it. But the first, line of defense or relief really, in my opinion, should come from the states themselves. And I think that them having that money for their own disaster relief, I think is more efficient in letting them do it rather than the federal government. That is what the argument is. The argument is not that we shouldn't have any disaster relief at all, or that we shouldn't spend money on disaster relief, but that's how they like to spin the argument, because they're not interested in having an actual honest conversation about FEMA. They're not interested in having an honest conversation about how to respond to these disasters. They just want you to believe that, hey, you see, this disaster happened, so therefore we got to spend more money. You need to pay up. And that's what they're doing. They're basically trying to tug on people's heartstrings. They're trying to play off people's emotions because of the fact that this disaster happened. And now they're saying, well, open up your pockets, right? And just give the government all your money to spend on whatever, right? Illegal immigrants, right? That's what they're doing. Instead of focusing on the fact that, hey, this happened and that we need to be doing everything we can to help the victims, to help the families, to help this community rebuild and to move forward. They don't want to focus on that. They rather focus on playing partisan politics, playing the blame game, and not really focusing on how to bring people together and how to move forward from this disaster, right? And that's essentially our media, right? They're more focused on trying to score political points against Trump than actually helping people, right? And that's what you're seeing here. So with that being said, my thoughts and prayers are with the victims, the families, the first responders, the state and local officials who are on the ground doing the work, trying to help people, saving lives. And I'm just hoping and praying that this community can move forward, that this disaster is over, and that they get all the relief that they need in order to rebuild their community. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.